Welcome to Chop Shop Motors. My name is Clay, and today is episode 3 of putting this little 289 back together. So part 3 of making this motor something we can put in inventory and use for a future project. Where we left off last video was ordering some pistons because the 11-to-1, one of the 11-to-1 pistons was broken. So machine shop that I deal with, Morrison's, ordered up a set of pistons for me, a set of cast rings, and I took the rods down and they put the connecting rods on the pistons, got me all fixed up. So now we have shifted the mark a little bit on this motor. It was going to be kind of let's see if we can do it on the dirt cheap, and now it's not dirt cheap, but it's still not bad. So we probably will have, I was shooting, I was hoping to keep it at around 350 to 4, and we're probably going to we'll be just under $500 when we're all done with a finished motor and all the parts being, put together, and kind of that's the total out of pocket, which was a little more than I was hoping to spend, but for a brand fresh, which is basically what we'll have, a brand fresh little V8, $500 is, that's 1980s money to get a motor for $500. I don't know if you can find them that cheap anymore. I sure can't. So we'll have a good little bullet to put in something for under $500. That's still a pretty good deal. And so let's get rolling. What I got to do now is I got to check the end gap on the piston rings. So this particular set of rings runs a little more. They're Hypertechnic piston top ring is, and it runs a little more end gap. So but just check, verify the end gap has enough and on the top ring, and then we'll slide these together. So let me do a little end gap measurement, and then we'll start putting some pistons in. Progress so far. Got the first 4 pistons in, checked the gap, the top rings, and assembled the pistons and slid them in. So we're making some progress. Looks pretty cool. Always love this part where the motor starts to come together. So yay on that. We'll finish up the other 4 probably tomorrow or this weekend, and we'll get this little motor all buttoned up. So I'll bring you back as we put the next 4 pistons in. Thanks for following along. It's always a little bit of a challenge in these videos. How much do you show? How much do you kind of breeze through to keep it entertaining and not a long drawn out kind of boring video? So I'm knocking the pistons in. I thought I would stop and just show you some things I think about when I'm prepping a piston to put it in. So lots of places here that you want to pay attention, and I'll point out a couple of them. So a few things I do when I put the rings on, I always clock the rings in a third, and a third. So the oil ring I line up with the notch in the front. That's just my style. Then I go a third and a third for the second and top ring to keep them spread out. Always something you want to do. I lube everything up with kind of a low viscosity oil as I'm prepping it, so it's got lots of lube when it first starts. I pay check, double check, triple check to make sure that the rod end has a number on it, and it's the right piston, the right rod. It's on the piston. The piston's on the rod correctly. You're just double checking everybody else's work and that you've grabbed the right piece. On these little motors, the tang on the bearing goes away from you and the number is visible. So you're checking to make sure that the number you picked is the right one. So in this case, we're looking for a number 6. That's what we have. Notch goes forward. We're going to slide it in. I've rotated the crank away, the farthest away, and centered to the piston, so the rod can't hit the crank. Then I grab my piston tool. So lots of people use a hammer. I stopped using a hammer because eventually the end of the hammer gets beat up and pieces start going in the motor. So I use a heavy, kind of a dead weight plastic weighted piece of plastic pipe, and it's worked for a long time. It works really well to be kind of a dead blow. I check to make sure the piston is exactly centered. I tap my ring compressor down and I slowly start to tap the piston in. If I reach any resistance and it starts to hook a ring, I stop, because this isn't the time to force anything. So at that point I stop and I check it out. I might reposition the ring compressor to get it to a better spot, to compress it a little different. You just have to be really patient doing this. So then I guide it in. I look down to make sure the rod is perfectly straight. I'm guiding it in, making sure it's not hitting the other, because now I've got another rod right next to it. Sliding it down, and it's in. I pull my guards off. Again, right here, I take the rod, I check to make sure the number's up, tang to tang on the connecting rod. Very few motors don't go tang to tang, but there are a couple out there that don't go tang to tang, so you just got to watch it. These motors all go tang to tang, so you can use that as a validation. Just kind of tap that together. When I put my rod nuts on, because these rods have been together before, I just make sure and put them on with the same surface that touched the rod before, doing it again. So I'm not, I make sure not to flip them over and go with the other surface against the rod. It would probably be okay, but I like to have it where that smooth surface is against the rod, just like it was when it came apart. Okay, then I do this by hand. I don't use an impact here because I want to feel if something's bound up. This is an area where you could get something bound up and then you could torque it with it bound up and it might take the torque, and yet it's not right. Okay, that's that. We can now rotate to the next piston and install it. That's kind of the lowdown on doing how I do one of these pistons. Pistons are all in. Whenever I do a motor, no matter what's going on that day, I don't stop on the motor until I torque after all the pistons are in. This is a critical spot in the build that you don't want to accidentally forget. So pistons are in, time to torque. So these connecting rods are really small. They only take a torque of 24 foot-pounds. So you're really not putting much on them. I use a Click Style Matco torque wrench. You can use one of the kind that has the needle that's all manual, and you watch how much deflection there is in the needle to tell where you're at. Those are actually supposed to be really accurate. So if that's what you have, they're been around forever. That's okay too. Right, I always check just to make sure everything turns over super nice and easy. If you have a problem and something rears its head, best to find it now rather than having someone say the motor won't turn over after I got it all put together. Like, well, at least you would know where the problem was. So right now, short block is together and everything turns nice. We'll get ready to put the oil pump on in the pan. Okay, short block's together. Everything looks good. Rods and mains are torqued, oil pumps on, pickups on, oil pump rods in. So now I'm just going to, it's time to put the pan gasket on and put a pan on it. So let's do that. There we go. Put a little trail of silicone on here. I don't like to use very much. I don't put any around the oil pump pickup. I put a little bit around the pan loop, but not very much. Silicone's one of those funny things. A little goes a long way. So we'll just going to get this prepped for the gasket. Okay. Fish that down inside between the block and the main cap. Get everything set the way it goes. Spend a little extra time just to make sure it's not getting pinched outside of the rail. Okay. Get the pan on. Pan gasket kind of tucks underneath that little area there. Nice. I put just a dab, especially right here in the corner where these two come together. Just to make sure that this area seals really well. It's a odd little joining of the rubber to the cork. And then I just put a small amount on this. This lined up. Okay, there's that. set the pan down. And I start all the bolts before I tighten anything up. A little tedious, but all the bolts on the inside of the pan rail are 1/4 except for the four corners. The four corners are 5/16 National Kors, and so you have a little different bolt just on the four corners. Okay. We need the 4 additional 5/16 bolts in the front and the rear. Okay, so there we go. Getting started. Okay. And start pulling down. There's no rush, no hurry. You're going to go around these, at least the way I do it is I go around the whole thing a few times. So I kind of go back and forth. Again, I don't use an impact because I kind of want to get a feel. These pan bolts are really small, so if you get a little overzealous, you can snap it off in the block and then you're pulling it all back apart to fish out the broken bolt. So we just go a little at a time, start snugging stuff down. So typically after you go around the smaller ones, the 5/16 will have some room to get pulled back down again. Okay. Okay, pan's done. All right, we're ready again. Well, I'm jumping to the end. The little motor is basically together. Push rods are still in the cleaner, so I'll come back and put those in, but I set it together just to show you what the motor looks like all done. This is the finished product. Everything's tight. Everything is pretty buttoned up. I'll come through and do a last few details, but this is more or less what it's going to look like. And happy with the finished product. We'll tape it all up and seal it all up and put it in inventory. 160 over 289 should be good to go for a project. I'm Clay for Chop Shop Motors, and we'll see you on the next project.